For much of modern history, productivity growth and wages moved together. When economies became more productive, workers eventually shared in the gains. But that relationship has broken down before. The first chart shows what economists call Engels' pause during the early Industrial Revolution. Between roughly 1780 and 1840, output per worker rose sharply. Real wages did not. Productivity increased by more than 40%, while wages grew by barely 12%. For decades, living standards stagnated even as the economy expanded. That divergence was not temporary friction. It reflected a structural mismatch. Technology advanced faster than labor institutions could adjust. Capital reorganized production before workers had bargaining power, political voice, or social protection. Eventually, reforms followed. Wages caught up. Stability returned, but only after prolonged strain. The second panel shows the modern equivalent. Since the late 1970s, productivity has again risen steadily by roughly 60%. Median compensation has grown by less than 20%. The gap is larger than during Engels' pause, and it has persisted longer. This is the great decoupling. Once again, productivity growth has separated from broad-based income growth. But this time, the driver is not steam power or mechanization. It is digital automation, software, and now artificial intelligence. The pattern is similar. The scale is larger, and the adjustment window is shorter. This divergence is not just an economic issue. It is the starting point of the TFP stability paradox. The second set of visuals explains the mechanism. At the core of the model is a simple causal chain. Automation increases productivity. Rising productivity reduces labor demand and compresses labor share of income. As labor share falls, inequality rises and the size of the governing coalition shrinks. That last step is critical. Political systems remain stable when governing coalitions are broad. As coalitions narrow, power concentrates. Policy flexibility declines. The system becomes brittle. The charts on the right show that this relationship is not linear. As labor share declines from around 55% toward 25%, political stability does not erode gradually. It collapses superlinearly. At around 25% labor share, more than 80% of governing capacity is lost. Small changes produce outsized effects. This is why traditional trend-based models miss the risk. The validation panels show that this mechanism holds across countries and over time. The model was calibrated on U.S. data from 1970 to 2020 and tested across multiple advanced and emerging economies. Automation intensity explains the majority of variation in stability outcomes. Monte Carlo simulations reinforce the result. Across 1,000 scenarios, the same pattern appears repeatedly. Faster automation drives faster coalition collapse and less offset by institutional adaptation. The baseline projection shows what happens without intervention. Coalition size declines steadily. Around 2028, democratic stability begins to fail. By the early 2030s, the system transitions toward oligarchic control. At that point, reform becomes politically infeasible. This is where the selectorate model becomes essential. The selectorate framework focuses not on voters as a whole, but on the size of the coalition leaders must satisfy to remain in power. When that coalition is large, leaders must deliver broad public goods. When it is small, leaders rely on narrow private benefits. The third set of charts shows how automation-driven labor displacement shrinks the selectorate. Effective labor participation declines. Labor share compresses by 30 percentage points over a decade. As fewer people have economic leverage, fewer people matter politically. The top panel compares trajectories with and without intervention. In the baseline case, coalition size collapses from roughly 68% to below 35%. That is the transition from democracy to oligarchy. Intervention changes the slope. Policies that slow labor displacement, redistribute automation gains, or expand participation flatten the curve. Coalition size stabilizes above critical thresholds. Democratic systems remain viable. The lower panels show how this happens. Automation-indexed income support cushions displacement. Progressive capital taxation slows labor share collapse. Sectoral bargaining preserves wage formation even as technology advances. The cost-benefit analysis is explicit. The fiscal costs are measurable. The social returns are large. In combination, these interventions maintain coalition breadth and preserve stability. The key insight is timing. Interventions only work while coalitions are still broad. Once the system crosses the threshold into narrow, selectorate control, redistribution becomes politically blocked. This creates a narrow decision window, roughly 2025 to 2029, not to stop productivity growth, but to manage it. Together, these models are not predicting crisis. They are mapping pressure. They show where productivity gains exceed institutional capacity. They identify when economic divergence becomes political instability. And they clarify which interventions still work and when. The goal is not certainty. It is foresight, time to adjust policy, time to reposition capital, time to act before nonlinear transitions become irreversible. As artificial intelligence accelerates productivity, the binding constraint is no longer technology. It is institutional adaptation. We are building the decision infrastructure that makes those limits visible. Computational foresight for a nonlinear world.